Welcome to this buildingSMART Room session as part of the buildingSMART International Standard Summit Rome 2023. Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Evandro and I will be your moderator today. This afternoon session is titled Report on IFC 5 Sessions from Last General Assembly. The speaker you will hear from is Greg Schleusner, from Technical Director of Design and Technology at HOK and co-lead of the Technical Room. This session is scheduled to last 1.5 hours with questions all the time, I guess. The session is being recorded and will be made available in the replay section of the event as soon as possible. Before I hand over to our speakers, I would like to remind you that this is a hybrid event. For online attendees, your microphones will remain muted for the duration of this session. If you wish to ask questions, please use the chat box in the control panel. For those in the room, please try to keep background noise to a minimum and raise your hand if you wish to make a comment or ask a question. Also like to bring to you, the buildingSMART is committed to ensuring the participation in the development of standard is unrestricted and the process for their adoption is transparent, and standards that are developed do not favor any particular provider and are open, non-binding and accessible to all. Please take note of our antitrust code of conduct. And now I would like to hand over to Greg.
So we're just setting up the camera here. Thanks for joining today. I actually wanted to do this, but because I was late in the earlier session, it made perfect sense to use the board. So we're gonna use whiteboards. I have slides I can show them to you, but the point is not to do that, but to just walk through sort of first start with the requests, talk through what seems to be the pattern of what a solution to this sort of what IFC 5 wants to look like and the sort of the pieces, and then if anybody has something they really want to diagram out, I'll ask for requests of something that we use as an example to sort of put the idea through the paces. Audience participation is very much requested. That's sort of the point of having a working session like this. Before we get started, questions from anyone? Okay. So first off, can anybody start to list off anything from an end user's perspective you would imagine we've gotten requests of IFC 5 to do better than IFC does today? Anything? I have a list, so I can just read the list, but no one?
Come on.
What's that?
I was looking forward to this.
I think we said before in the other section about the technical room, but it's the track of the owner history of information.
So change, and I have change understanding being easy. Is that okay? Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's going to be very helpful, but from what we see in end users, there is also a request for reducing complexity. Is it kind of the relationships and all the things connected to each other with type levels and occurrence levels? It's hard to have them in an understanding level for them at this point.
Okay. I swear all these are on my slides already, so this is good. But anybody else? Keep Evandro on his toes.
So I think slow implementation is a kind of thing that is bad in current IFC versions. So it takes years for people to implement, including us. And I think another thing is there are several ways to do the same thing in IFC.
Would you add extensibility into this one? Like, I want to add something easily?
Yeah, basically that is that if there is a new version, it would come to the market fast.
What was the last one?
Just to have one
way.
of doing something, not multiple ways. Well, it affects on the implementation speed, for example.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, keep going. It's good. It's good. I'm glad you guys care. Otherwise, there would be no reason to do anything, right?
I'm thinking about how to describe it, but the use case would be, for example, for IFC window. I know the decomposition is possible, but now we have to do kind of workarounds to decompose a window into subparts, because we want to know the length of all the horizontal bars, but we also want to approach it like as a window, because you have got different use cases, but you model it only once for different parties. Like for if you want to replace the window, you want to approach it at one window, but it has to decompose in several objects if you want to do facility management or asset management.
Right.
So I know it's possible technically with the decomposition, but maybe there's a more logical way in 5.
So I think I have 2 things on my list that map to this. One is sub-element geometry, which is not exactly what you're saying, but then this is really just composability versus sort of fixed objects.
Yeah, I think that covers it. Yeah.
Okay. I think I heard that.
could be part of it. Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I thought about it. Yeah.
Okay, well, as long as I got the microphone, I would think performance is always a key.
Okay. Anyone else?
It might be a little bit off topic, but regarding this part of the objects, should we have a way to have the objects independently from the model, like existing of a open format for the objects that we then use in the models?
So object-based, not project-based, or
yes, it's not IFC, but it will be like some format that you can store the objects for using in the models.
oh, like a library
Yes.
concept. Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Oh, there we go.
I hope I'm in the topic, but to me, we have to keep it stable and sustainable, because I'm a user. I'm not developing anything on IFC, but as a user, I can have a project for 4, 5, probably 10 years if I'm thinking about the management of the asset after that. And I could set the contract on the project based on one version of an IFC. And so I want it to be very stable, sustainable until the end of my project, and perhaps more. And so this is another topic which is linked, which is compatibility with the previous version. Because of course, if I want to change and to pass to another version, I want to do that. If I have, I don't know, a tool which is not yet compatible with a new version, I want to be able to pass through version of IFC. So the compatibility between versions of IFC is quite crucial.
Okay. Anyone else? Otherwise, I can on how.
Yeah, but the structure that's been there for many years with the project side and so forth, it might be related to projects, kind of to products also, but it makes sense in the design, but it does make sense in all situations. I think it could be worth to consider to change that.
Well, so there's one that comes up, which is different people want to look at the same asset in different ways. Is that a good one, or map to that?
I got monolithic files from people online, from Pedro, actually.
Okay, yeah, that's perfect. Do we have this anywhere? No. Well, it's meant to be.
Well, mine is probably associated with that one, which is archivability.
Okay. I think I'm going to get a new page, archive. Is there an H in archive? Yeah. Craig can't spell, if you haven't noticed this. Okay, anybody else before we, well?
One more. Like the entire IFC model, you sometimes in the asset management phase, you have to change only one room because this room is split into 2 rooms.
Right.
So it's like checking out a little part of the IFC file and checking in an updated version, but only of a part of an IFC file.
You missed the session of this morning, but it's a good point. Don't worry, Greg missed it too.
Well, it's slightly different. So, but it's
Connected.
Yeah, I did miss it. So, hey, anybody else?
Perhaps
Go ahead.
yeah, perhaps it's still the same idea, but small change and too many change, and perhaps I spoke with some software vendors who trying to implement the IFC 4.3, and if we have another IFC version in 1 year or whatever for IFC 5, I think it's too short to between 2 versions.
Don't worry.
No, I am worried because if we have many versions each year of the IFC, it's difficult to implement. I know it's hard to implement, but yeah, quite to manage the time between version of IFC, it's very important because we need that the industry accept and use the version of IFC. So we need time for the acceptation, implementation. So
Yep. Okay. So the only ones I'd add, unless there's somebody that really wants to add something else, are, and this is probably mine. I work for an architecture firm, and we have a problem of, well, not just mine, but distributed and decentralized ownership of information. Like it's a, not one object. I've only come across one. I think I can't remember what it is. That my perfect example is like a light fixture. An architect, interior designer might place it. A lighting engineer or a lighting designer might own the light. Electrical engineer might own the connection. 3 people at least own these things simultaneously. And Angel has another, so good.
2 more.
Okay.
Searchable, right? It should be easy to find things in your file. It's similar to what you said. I'm just looking for something. I don't want to look through a step file, right? And the other one is extendable, right? So it should be easy to add to it without waiting 3 years.
Right.
So you were talking about the schema changes, extending the schema or extending the file.
This extending the use of it, right? So I have an airport, right? And
Right.
I don't want.
How long have we been waiting for that baggage enum list to be able to get into the IFC, or not the baggage, but the airport room object list?
Right, and I don't want to wait 2 years because I forgot one.
Right.
Right. So
That was yes. Okay. Searchable and
Yeah,
extendable. Okay.
just came out of the airport session. They're gonna put it in BSD. They're gonna extend IFC using BSD for
Yeah.
those
Yeah. I mean,
baggage conveyor.
and that makes perfect sense. But like, if there's something more core, yeah.
So I expect it not to be so much file-based because we're talking servers to servers, cloud.
You sound like a developer, which is the next list. But okay, that's fine.
And of course, we have properties today in the current IFC file, but is it requirements or is it a solution or what is it? And it's a little bit messy. So to be able to have multiple properties for the same thing, but for different stages in our life cycle.
And on how make sure you raise your hand right when we flip the page to the next list, because he has a list of how we need to talk about properties too. So, okay. So, oh, sorry. This is what you get for participation. People participate. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to just talk to, I'm Greg, this is some slides.
Probably a tricky thing to finish. We as user and as buildingSMART French chapter member, and we have many users facing troubles with the export functionality to have IFC. Okay, I'm not gonna name any tool here, but it is quite a reality. Okay, and I am asking myself if, again, I'm not a technical guy, so it's quite, perhaps it's not it's crazy and not possible to do. But is there any possibility to facilitate the export for users? I'm thinking too many times, architects, users, engineers, opening the IFC doc to try to understand the IFC and then try to set the parameters of the exports and to try to have a suitable export to send the work they've done to another tool, to another user. So I don't know how to name that. It's long for that, but it's quite a big problem.
Can I call that automatable? I don't know why I can't finish E's. I think maybe I have a stroke.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that. I think you express a legitimate concern, and part of that is already covered by let's reduce the number of ways to do things, right? Because that introduces possible error. But in general, we want to try to make this, well, and what you said, it's just simple to make, right? If it's a simple system, it's more likely to succeed. It's less error prone. And that does affect a user, right? That is legitimately something. So what we should try to keep this as simple as possible.
Right.
And yet extensible and searchable and distributed.
Right. So hopefully what we will talk through in a bit is a simple set of parts that we can use in very complex ways, which might be the right way to look at it. Okay. Any last ones before we go over to like a software list? Let's see if I have anything else on my list. Yeah, my list was easy to extend, granular data, additive workflows, nonlinear concurrent development of stuff, combined with other data, relationships are too complex, easy to change, sub-element geometry. Okay. Now let's talk through on the people that develop software for a living. What sort of things have you heard?
Can I cold call someone?
Yeah. You can do anything. Yeah. It's your room.
Sergey, wishes for IFC5 from developers' point of view?
Okay, from our point of view, I already mentioned it at one of our meetings. Maybe it's time not to consider IFC like publishing PDF 3D with some parametric data, but like normal editable BIM database. Because all those changes, what we talked about small changes, big changes, revisions, versions. Anyway, it leads to ability to create normal BIM database. And if we start making this IFC5 from the beginning, like BIM database, it may help solve those issues as well.
Okay. We got API from Bjorn. I would say less files, not no files. Is that fair? That's an L.
I think a general use, it could be better. We can separate geometry and properties. For some kind of site, we need a 3D model in usage, but in the production after the construction, maybe we just need the property.
You guys make my job easy, because then I have something that says, oh, this is why we're doing all these things. You guys give me the list instead of me telling you why we're doing things. So, okay.
Yes, most of the things that have been said so far, we couldn't agree more. We done a lot of effort in trying to make IFC files editable and in the cloud, and it has not been a pleasurable experience. So make it less complex.
Well, don't do it.
Editable.
That makes it pleasurable. You should.
No, it shouldn't be pleasurable, but with with the not pleasurable, I mean that maybe sometimes you spend more time on the technical things to fix the technical things, while instead having more friendly technology behind, you can concentrate more on the ideas that you can build on top of that. That was the point. And definitely agree with the more APIs to make it accessible, especially with the perspective of digital twins based on IFC models. So I agree with everything that has been said so far.
Okay. David, you're a hybrid.
I mean, it would be good to be able to have, within the structure of IFC, be able to describe both the physical model and also analytical models, so that we could, program that link. Not that IFC makes the link, but that we can describe it there.
Okay. And I would include, like, I want to have GS data sit next to my BIM data, and they mean the same, different representations of the same thing. And that, you mean like construction schedule, or what's the broader way to say that?
It's like aspect models or something like that.
Okay. I'm not familiar with that term, but I think I've heard it before. So, okay. Anyone else? Let me get to my slide. Oh yeah.
Yeah, so right now we have this very generic concept of parameters, as if all parameters are the same sort of thing. But really, we need to think about categorization of parameters. We have, at the very least, I can come up with the driving parameters, right? They're the ones that change things. Then you have calculated parameters. They're the ones that, volume, area. And then you have purely informative parameters. They're the ones that are the simplest to deal with. And we might want to consider each of those separately.
One thing that is not possible in IFC is the round tripping, and that is because it's practically impossible to implement, because you cannot pass that information. So if we could kind of have some other load or something that you could package your stair parameters in the IFC content, so that somebody else, not everybody could read, say, Revit's stair parameters, but some other Revit user could read them. So, and anyway, so you would have like the generic stair there that anybody can display. But if you want to modify it, then, and you happen to have the, say, Revit, then you could do it. So I mean, that's not perfect round trip, but at least you would have that. Yeah, I don't know if that.
That one's a big one on both, and like you said, it's an unsolvable, but there's a alternate way to solve round tripping without trying to make information ownership move between things. So we'll come back to that one. But thank you. Anyone else? Thank you for coming.
Developers.
Yeah, so lots of this stuff is indirectly already mentioned, because everything in this list should derive from the user list that was before. But yeah, basically random access, I think, is a big one for me. Doesn't have to be IFC itself, but because it's so incredibly hard to transform yeah, one of the main reasons to transform for me is random access anyway. And then Express, I think, died everywhere outside of CAD a long time ago. So serialization should be different somehow. And then I think there should be explicit reuse instead of right now it's just a big graph database and things are connected together sometimes to imply that they are equal, but oftentimes they aren't. So I think if we are explicit about reuse, we can save a lot of time finding duplicated geometry or properties or whatever, right?
That's not how you spell explicit. That's not even close. E? It's amazing I have a job. Anybody else care about, look at that. My third to last one was random access. Anybody else care about security? No? Okay.
That's so good you are recorded. I'm gonna
Nobody
reuse
cares
it.
about security. Can I write it down even if you guys don't care about it? How about I say enable?
Yeah, the only question about security is where, what bit of which standard owns that? Is that in the Open CDE? Is that in this?
Yeah.
It's in this room, but yeah.
Can we make it so you can apply security logic to your data easier?
Absolutely.
Is it a non-functional requirement? I mean, Express is secure. Would you define it secure or not
Well,
secure?
there's different kinds of security, but I think this one means can I explicitly control access to data, which is slightly different. Well, there's a lot of these.
Right. I think this needs a parking lot or an asterisk or something, unless we're going to list all the different things. But maybe data access might be a simpler subtask that's explicit. Okay, then let's leave it at that then.
Well, let's start a conference. Done. Okay. Anybody else?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No, you say. Signature. Yeah. So who's done it? Who done it? And that, I think that
traceability.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, especially if you bake in the updates.
Someone signed the original and someone signed the...
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like if we talk we just very small.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Anything else?
Extensibility to add extensibility to add easy add to proprietary from data dictionary, and not over not so much layer of inheritance. Maybe a composition, easy to add more information.
Okay. Yeah.
Do I read too many relationships at the moment?
Oh yeah. I mean,
Say yes. Yeah.
Anybody want to get rid of some hierarchy in the
thumbs up for her? Okay.
Less. Can we make a distinction that there's maybe not enough user relationships and maybe too many sort of data modeling relationships? Is that fair?
Right. I think I would say more along the lines of less required relationships, right? So, for example, right now we have the project building site level, but maybe you don't really need the level per se, right? Do you?
Well, if you apply the logic that different things look different people, maybe you don't care about, I want to count something, I don't care what level it's on, or I'm a rail operator and I have a building, but I don't want to have to interrogate my data through a building site. I want to think of it as a rail yard that has, all these things in it. So there's, I think, less required.
Yeah.
So when I think about the relationships, for me, what's really annoying is that relationships can often be applied anywhere and everywhere throughout the geometry hierarchy. And that makes it really annoying if you want to parse things efficiently, because if you're just looking at a single wall, that doesn't really tell you anything. You got to also know everything that points to the wall, but also everything that points to the children of the wall in any way. So one obvious example for me is voids. So the voids, I think, are really, really terrible, because any kind of reuse that you have is completely broken, because any type of void may be applied to any type of object, and it could be in the exact same configuration that that object lives in like 1,000 times. So performance technically, it's really stupid that we have IFC rel void defined on the top level. And to add to that, what you get really often these days is you get a model actually that already has the void applied to the geometry, but still has the rel void assigned to it. So then it's even like you're doing all this work just to figure out it's already done. It makes no sense. Same for materials, I think.
Okay. Are we good with less hierarchy, strict application of rules? Because this is trying to parse this a little bit.
A couple more I can think of. Ability to reference external data, right? So not everything has to be in IFC. That's not just BSCD. That could be other formats.
Do you care if the data? Well, let's leave it at that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the other thing is, how do I put this? Something that is easy to develop common tools on top of. Right. So in general, I'd like to see more consistent IFC data generated regardless of source. But that can only really happen if there are tools that help us. Well, we simplify the format, but also maybe there are tools that help us follow that simplified format. So something that makes it easier, yeah, to make tooling.
Okay. Okay, so that's a good list. If you have anything else, we can just mention it as we go through. So let's just talk about what things appear to, what the solutions start are. Oh, I'm trying to add all the caveats in the world. What are the patterns that are emerging that we think this solution starts to look like? Okay. Is that people comfortable with that phrasing? Patterns? It's a developee term. David's not happy with it.
No, I was going to ask that. Are there certain decisions about a solution that we are currently actively considering, and if so, put those on the table for everyone who maybe hasn't been involved in all the discussions?
Oh yeah, no, I'm gonna try to model it out right now.
But maybe start with the stuff where we have agreement on,
yep,
but not necessarily the whole system, and then we can all take it from there.
Oh yeah. So let's just do this quickly. So not detail, but the big pieces. One is everybody that touches this thinks cloud-based libraries of definitions of things needs to be expanded and become more common used. So like if I have an object and it's not an IFC, but it's a localized object for my airport or something like that, it should be just the same as using a country standard, an international standard. So that is like, you know, let's just call this a library. Or I guess we could call it a dictionary because this is what everybody calls it. But there are tons of these, not just one. Because if everybody took on extensible, I need to be able to do it localized, I need to do all these things inside my company, you need a lot of these things. Okay? So that's an easy one. So the next one is today, someone pick an object because I said I would do this way. Anyone, any part of the world, building, infrastructure, doesn't matter to me. Someone has to have a favorite object. A pile, like an underground one? Okay. Concrete or steel? I'm going to try to draw it. So this is what piles look like, right? Sort of. Maybe they don't have the flange at the top. Oh, okay. Okay, so today in our world of IFC, this is one thing, basically. And I'm saying one thing, but in the software world, this is, you know, one object that's highly typed, and it's one thing. So the big distinction that everybody sees is actually, well, it depends on who you are. It's just one property, or it's all the geometry, or it's my geometry, not their geometry, or it's my cost data. And so this needs to become a bunch of things. I can drive more boxes, but you get the idea. Like geometry, cost, one property, I don't know, time. So far, so good. You can imagine you just go on forever. So going from this, where it's just one thing, to these things, pretty clear, makes sense? And the fact of, though, is what we're potentially doing is making a lot more things you have to standardize, but they're more easy to standardize because they're a lot smaller. So that's the rub of going from this to that. Everybody understand? Questions?
Maybe just to give an example, I was in another talk where there was some I forget if it was the building or the product or the airport room, and they were talking about, yeah, we're not sure if this thing, what room should own this thing, because, you know, there's sort of parts of aspects of these things that are specific to airports, and then some are common with rail. What this does is says of the pile, right, or of maybe maybe for signage as an example, there may be the geometric properties, how you define geometry, the technical room decides. Maybe the buildings room has some generic signage stuff, and then the airport room defines some property sets or some components or whatever those bits are that might apply to things in airports. So it allows the different rooms to get on with the bit that they're specialized in, and then one object in a model can just grab, oh yeah, the airport room defined these things, we need that, and the buildings room defined these things, and the technical room this. And
yeah, no, I mean, it's pretty apparent when you push on this that having one group of people sit down and try to define every object in the world is very hard and never complete. Okay?
Also, this needs to be cloud friendly.
Well,
right, which wasn't on there.
We had, what did we have? We had, yeah, you're right. We had API, database, less files, but yes.
Yes. And another thing that we never talk about, but also goes with the searchability, is IFCs in English. Many of the users in this room are not primarily English speakers. It should be localizable. I should be able to search for something that's a wall in my native language, and the IFC file should be able to find it. Sorry, yes. The IFC data source. Excellent point.
Okay. Okay, so we got that. If you make all these definitions, you should be able to serve these definitions from a lot of places. That's this, and that on our pile, we take one definition and you allow it to be broken into many pieces. It's not actually that complex. So the pattern that we're using, and we're violating from the start, the sort of the software architecture version of this is something called ECS, and we can throw this as away as soon as everybody stands it and comes up with a better term, but this is where we started, so this is what we're using. So entity component system, the system part we'll ignore for a bit, but it's certainly a part of it. if Jakob was here, somebody remind me to bring up functions and function logic. So anyway, so this is entity. So the E and then a component. Component. So it's quite simple. What this comes from the game development world, but there's many different names for it. I'm not a software engineer or developer. Oh shoot. I'm blanking on the other options, but basically what it says is the entity is just the entity. It's a IM pile. Yeah, and there's a in a version of this, you don't even need this thing because it's implied by the whole way down. But okay, so or an ID, right? So if you want to know what you don't want to know what it is, you need maybe to associate a classification with it, or it's just an ID. So that's an entity. Tom, you've played with these systems. Autodesk is building one. Any helpful feedback on how to describe this system or why it exists? If it's not helpful, you can also mention as well.
Yeah, it's mostly decoupling. So there's a link there to what you're describing and BIM. So the idea is everybody talks about entities. You want to keep them simple so that you only have to agree on the ID or maybe the type, but preferably only the ID. And then the S stand for system. So different systems can talk about entities, but they should really they can talk about all entities, but they should restrict themselves to some component types. And that's kind of the link to BIM that, you might have a bunch of different owners of the data. They all talk about the same entities, but they only talk about specific components. So somebody might only need geometry, or you might only need some specific form of geometry. Like right now, it's really annoying that IFC is a design tree, right? So you get a design tree, you got to figure out what it means if you want to turn it into triangles. So one thing you could do is you could have different components, one for triangles, one for design tree. If you want to edit, you need the design tree. If you want to see what the result is, you just need the triangles. So it's like decoupling users of the data from creators of the data and also from different use cases. It's really powerful. And so in an anti-component system, the system would do some kind of an operation on the component, but I don't think that's super relevant here.
Yeah, the way I look at this is system is software in this model for whatever you want to do with it. Yeah.
Maybe one way to think about, to understand the idea, I think to go into component is helpful because let's say we have, so a component is in a sense a property set that has one property called describes, and it has an ID. So and then there's other properties associated with it. So if one component, for example, could be a classification component, and it'll have the ID that it describes. It'll have the URI of the classification system that would point to BSDD, for example. So you could say it would point to IFC 4.3, and then it would have either the URI or the string, the name of the class that you're applying to this thing. And what you could do is you could publish 3 different classifications of the same entity, one for IFC 4.3, one for IFC 2.3, one for the particular client's asset management, right? We talk about mapping between these things. You could say that this particular entity in these different classification systems is classed this way, right? You could have a master class on it, you could have the IFC 4.3, and that way, if a quantity surveyor says, I want to get all the classification components that use the master class classification, boom, they have all the information about all the entities in the model according to the classification they care about, and they can go out and reach out for that. Whereas with the original model, will still have, all the other information there.
Yeah, and it makes random access easy because if I don't want the geometry, I don't have to get it. I don't need the geometry components. I can go right to the data sets I want. Are there anything online?
Nope.
Okay, so the key thing about this is that this thing never wants to change if you're talking about an instance of a thing. Like that pile always wants to have this entity no matter who has a copy or who's aware of it. Okay, that makes sense. Because then what you can do is, David said URI, all kinds of ways we could do this, GUIDs, URIs, whatever, doesn't really matter in the implementation and this is where we diverge immediately from a traditional ECS system, I think, is we have the problem of distributed ownership, not central ownership. So maybe in a traditional ECS system, the entity might point to the components. Like, I own all these things. But in our world, we need to say, well, I point to the entity, which is a departure from the traditional model. Some people say. Tom's nodding, so everybody online, someone else that's not Greg agrees.
Well, that goes very well with the extensibility requirement that you said. So if I want to extend, I don't need to bother the owner. I can extend it.
Right. This is the fundamental key to make this work well, is that we do this. And if you have this and you have none of anybody else's components, you can still do it.
Someone's giving me the ID, and someone says, I want the height of this pile. Don't the arrows have to go both directions?
You have to be able to find the component entity you're looking for. How you traverse the data to find it, that's a how do you say this? That's a question we have to answer.
Right.
But certainly you don't necessarily have to start with pile. You could start with components that point to piles. I have a list of all piles, IDs, find me components, pile component, height, yep, there's my ID.
Okay.
So you probably will end up with a little bit more information on the components to help describe the thing that they point to in this model than you would in a regular one, because it's not inferred easily.
You don't need a list of entity IDs, right? In terms of what you're working with, in terms of the data you have, you've got a list of components that have IDs in them. And then as you read through, you can build up a list of entity IDs.
Right.
But if you have an entity ID by itself, that's like that, a thing exists and that's it, right? All the information sits in components. So it's really, you're moving components around.
Right, because what he's describing, if this never materializes as a thing in a database, you still have everything you need, because all the shared IDs of the virtualized entity exist on these guys. So like every component carries around its entity, even if you never have it, which is
Yeah, and so the reason you never need the ID and you don't need to go from ID to component is that the owner of the component type is the system to administrate and figure out which components exist. So if you want to get the classification component for an ID, you don't go from the ID to the component. You ask the system that owns the classification components for that component for a specific ID. So the ownership of the type is completely parked away somewhere else. And that's why you can also add new ones and remove them, right? So you never go from ID to component specifically. You go to a component type and ask for a specific component of an ID.
I mean, certainly there's scenarios where if I want everything and I have the entities, I might ask for the entities to get all their components, but it's traversing this is actually hard. It's easier to just go right to the components and that.
Yeah, and also it's a challenge, but the way you should design this is that is something that you never want to do, right? So you want to support use cases by defining components that are pretty well isolated. So you don't need to answer a question. You shouldn't need 3 components, right? You should maybe need 1, maximum 2, but I don't know, you want to keep it separate. Yeah.
Or perhaps, I mean, there are going to be families of components that are defined together, right? And maybe it's 1, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 3, but to answer one type of question, like if you want to answer a costing question, you should only look at costing components, and they may exist within a costing namespace, right? They may, that kind of thing.
Right. So let's do an example that starts to point how this comes together when you take this approach. I'm going to switch. What piles are sort of boring in this Well, they're not boring. I just don't have a good demo for them. So, okay, imagine we have a furniture app. This is a chair. I have a much better version of my PowerPoint. Why do chairs? It's a modern chair with 3 legs that doesn't look like a chair. So, whatever. Okay, simple app. Okay, and over here we have BIM tool as of today. Oh, Jesus. Hey. Okay. So in the current world, I have this tool. I really like it. It's really good at planning furniture. So I make a bunch of chairs. Okay. Now today, if the second I export to IFC, and let's say I wanted to start using this app. Let's say that app's good at something. What I'm doing is I have to make one of 2 decisions immediately. Stop using this one or have a copy. Right? This is fundamentally, design transfer is this in a superset, but this is a problem if you want to actually use more than one tool at the same time, right? So the solution is to do what we're talking about and say, if I'm talking about chairs, I have, like this says, I'll just draw these a little bigger. Jesus. So this says style. Well, it would if I can write. Style, location. Why did I dress a big box? Why do I can't remember what the 3rd word is in this. How dumb am I? And geometry. Okay, so if I, instead of exporting them as one thing, export as 3 things, I can take and say, this application can also have these, but instead of going down, probably making the side of my head blue, instead of going down the path of saying, I'm giving these to you, we immediately say, the way you use this system is reference, copy, or clone, author. So reference these things in. Now, if you have those same chairs and you move them, you get a new location. And let's say they add material. So what do I have? I have some duplicates, right? But lucky thing, we can compose stuff. So what you do is you compose the component that you want from the things you want, and then you have access to. And location should not be referenced. That one should. So in this model, basically what you're doing is we're not trying to head on solving geometric interop. We're saying that if you have an assembled object, you can move it into different applications, reference it, and get the same data and assemble it outside of an individual application. That makes sense?
That assumes some shared, or that these software are using like centralized.
Yeah, let's say this is Greg's architectural company that has these 2 pieces of software. You're absolutely right. There's some way I can simultaneously access the same data sets.
Okay.
Okay, so let's say we take your example though, and I have let's say we have a designer and we have a contractor. This is how my demo is set up. So now I can take, let's say I have 3 things, and I want to start collaborating with somebody that lives in a different world and is not on my IT system and so forth. we'll introduce a concept, but we haven't found a name for it. It's probably not layer, but it probably is container or wants to be container. You say, let me make a collection. It's also a good word. A collection of things that I want to share. We need a file-like concept because one of the things when we looked at, we had the linked data discussion in the community for a while, and everything, you had to deal with everything at the minute object level. You didn't have a concept of a container or anything like that. So basically what you say is this thing, key, it also points to what it addresses. This container, I want to share something, so I'm going to make a container. I just want to share those two things, the entity and that component. Okay? Now, in a web world, this is how you make the endpoint. Here's your endpoint for me sharing data for you. This is where we have security applied and these sort of things, control and access and that sort of stuff. David? Thank you.
I guess I was just going to say, I've got another example that if you want after that I could walk through that takes a look at this from a different perspective and really just focuses on the ECS stuff, because it's, once you get into this way of thinking, all of a sudden we're very much into open CDEs, endpoints, security, like it's pretty vast.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Sorry, I'm being rude and suggesting that I've got another example I can share if you want.
Yeah, let's go through the simple version of this, but then, yeah, we can absolutely, I mean, I don't need to do anything. I don't need to be the leader of this. So, okay, so I have a container, and now I can, put a cloud in here or whatever. I don't really care. Now, they have, that's what they have, right? But they can make new components immediately. Like this is how you start to collaborate that also point to that entity, right? So there is a case for sharing entities. We got it in Boston. We heard from, what is it, Neil? No, at Autodesk. Civil in the UK. Nigel, sorry. Nigel was pointing out that in the UK they have this thing where they want to, whoever operates the road says, I think you're going to have 500 signs in this length of road. Here's 500 entities. No data on them, just 500 signs. That means they can start tracking the IDs internally before they exist. But they can share just that part, and then this process plays out. But so the key thing is there is a use case for sharing basically an ID that says it's a sign, but that's it.
And that's potentially a classification component.
Right. Yeah.
Right. You're sharing a classification component.
Yeah. Okay. So now we have shared data, and now you obviously can do the same thing. If this entity, the contractor, let's say, wants to share it back, you say, I'm not going to share data you already gave me. I'm going to point to the things I want to share. I only want to share one thing back, but I need to point to the entity. You're not going to make a copy of the entity, but you know the entity. Well, actually, you don't need to do that, as David has rightly pointed out, because the component has the entity belongs to on it already. And so basically what you've done is simultaneous, distributed, multi-authoring in a collaborative way. And if we add the fact that this could actually take over, like, let's say they take over a component of my work, like the geometry. They have a next kind. I still have my copy. They can have theirs. We now have two different representations, the one you need and the one I need. Same concept. Now, clearly if this is distributed, there's an owner that comes into play and says, which one do they want? Works the same way. And there's nothing special about ownership of data here besides that you assemble what you want and have access to. Yes.
I have a question. If one of the two new bricks is as the one you don't send at the first time. If you have a double information because you don't send this one to the other, but he defined this information twice because he did it.
I mean, this doesn't solve stupidity, right?
It's a matter of model too.
What I will say, and I hope David was going to point out, is your project should have registered ownership of who's supposed to do which components, right? We talked about there needed to be multiple things. At the project level, you should be able to, at project owner, country, whatever, say, oh, in this project type, they owe me these two, and they owe me these two. So the idea of registering component ownership and then the apps themselves being aware of it is a very logical process. So I know I shouldn't be producing this, I should be receiving it. So there's no, I mean, David might have a...
Well, I think another aspect to look at is, and maybe this goes back to the user requirements for IFC5, is this format should be able to represent an inconsistent and unbuildable and doesn't meet the requirements state of the design, right? You need to be able to get your preliminary design that doesn't work yet into the format. Otherwise, all your design work has to happen before you can export to IFC. So, the format should be able to represent a wrong building so that your validation tools can then tell you that it's wrong. Right? Just like today, you can represent a BIM model with clashes. It's not like, Revit doesn't stop you from putting it in the, or like, it doesn't say, I can't link that other file, sorry, there's a clash. Right? That would basically mean you have to do all your work before you can use the tool. Something that's physically impossible.
Physically impossible, yes.
Yeah.
Should be supported.
Yeah.
Data impossible, no.
Right. Well, like for instance, like two people define conflicting information about something, right? Is that a technical problem, or is that a sign that the project team should have a coordination meeting?
That again, archivability, you need to, at some point, you'll need to take a snapshot.
Can I share my example? Yeah, okay.
Right. So we should be, there should be something in the mechanism that allows you to say, I can generate a consistent state.
Yes, yes. So, hi everyone, my name is David. So I'm going to pick up on the sign example because it's nice and simple. And I've got 4 actors in the example. We got an asset owner, we got a alignment designer, a signage designer, and a coordinator, right? So the very first thing that happens is we're going to talk about one road with one sign on it and how that works. So first, the asset owner publishes a data container that has 2 components in it. So there's a classification component, and it says this is an IFC 4.3 IFC sign, and then it has the ID of the sign, which is entity 1. So this is entity 1. So it publishes that, and then it also publishes I'm going to call it a dot.asset tag, which is a special classification that they own. They publish it on BSDD so everyone can use it, but it's their special thing, and they give it the tag of sign A. So there's this data container with 2 things, and they send that out to the project team, and they've said there's going to be a sign, and it's an IFC sign, and this is the asset tag that we're going to use for the life cycle of this thing, and it's also got the ID of 1. And then second stage, independently, you've got the alignment designer also publishes a data container with 2 components. The first component is a classification component, and it is also to IFC 4.3, and it is an IFC alignment. And I apologize for those of you who know the IFC standard better than me, so I'm probably getting the specific names wrong. So that is a component, and it refers to the entity, it gets entity ID 2. You know, in real life, these will be GUIDs or UUIDs or URIs or something, but just for the example, it's just a number. And then there's also a geometry component, and it refers to entity 2, and it's got the information about the geometry of the alignment. And just for the sake of this example, we're going to skip placement in space and all that, but we can do that with more components. So that's great. And there's a coordinator. Oh, yes. Yeah.
You've referenced ID1 and ID2.
Yep.
Is anything sent that is ID1 and ID2?
So,
or is that implicit?
There is a file, and this has an ID attached to the component. This has an ID attached to the component. There is not a separate list in this example of entity IDs.
Right. Okay. So
Yeah.
there's an implicit ID1 thing, an
exactly.
implicit ID2. Okay.
And with GUIDs and UUIDs, if I want to start talking about a thing that no one else has been talking about before, you know, we have the technology to generate a unique ID, right? And so that's there. Next, there's this. These are containers. So there's one data container here, and there's one data container here. Now, traditionally, we have this idea of a set, right? An architectural set. You know, everyone sends their drawings to the architect. The architect puts it all together and wraps it up in a bunch of elastic bands and goes out. So we have the third person is the coordinator, and they publish what we're going to call a container set. And a container set is fundamentally just a list of containers. So there's going to be container 1, right? This is container 1, and we're going to have the version. And we are going to have the, right, and then we're going to have a query, or a filter, we could call it. So basically, this container would be a URI or a URL referring to where we can get the data, or potentially a copy of the data. What version of the data this refers to, so that you can say, hey, I want this version from this day, you know, version A, and I want to apply this query, because you put a bunch of information in your data container that you shouldn't have done that. Sorry, I'm going to ignore your geometry. We're going to use the geometry from the other person. So you can filter that down. So, and then you've got container 2 with the query filter. So that's great. This is now the project working coordination thing. The signage designer gets this from the project coordinator, either has the data attached to it or goes and downloads that data, you know, getting into an open CDE kind of situation. And they will then publish another data container with, again, 2 or 3 components. One component that is, actually, no, they don't need to classify their component. They are going to now give a geometry component with whatever geometry of the sign is, and it refers to 1. And they're also going to have a placement component, and maybe it will be like an alignment placement component, and it will have alignment, and that would say refer to 2, and it would have a chainage, distance along the alignment, and an offset. So what we're getting here is we have the signage designer is publishing this, and then as a final step, the coordinator will republish this list and include the third container. And so what we've got now is we've got this set of containers with either copies of the data or references to specific versions. So we can download the data and archive those copies. So that's the archivability comes in with these sets. And basically the signage designer then can refer to the work of others. If the alignment changes, maybe the signage is wrong. But again, that's just the work in our industry, right? People change stuff. We got to check what the implications are in the design, check that everything's correct.
But a nice opportunity there is it's ECS, so S is service. Absolutely makes this easy to have a little web service that I'm a I'm a good designer. If the geometry changes, I can have a service that just makes my new geometry for me. Because I don't have to know everything. I only see this small bit of data. I can, this is my business. I want to do it automatically. Again, whether it's automatically gets published without somebody checking, that's not our view, but like this makes that kind of thing really straightforward and simple to do.
So previously, or in current work, everybody owns a whole object, and the coordination is coordination of the placement of objects and all that. And it's the owner of each object who coordinates that object. So like, for instance, there's a gypsum wall that has sound transmission requirements and fire rating requirements. Well, whoever owns the wall, usually the architect, has to go and coordinate with those aspects, right? The coordinator, now there's a coordinator role who's coordinating just more widely, really all that data coming in. And so, for instance, you could have in the wall example, the acoustic engineer is publishing required sound ratings for all the walls. Someone else is publishing build-ups of the walls. And then you've got a script, right? An automated validator that pulls in the information and for all the walls, checks the required sound rating against the build-up and says, yes, everything's good.
Right, or the service could author the rating. All of those things, none of this is it does the magic of doing that, but breaking into pieces so you could have this distributed ownership model makes this conceivable and doable. Because today, if you did this automation, you said, well, I can figure out what the value is, but here, you fill it in for me.
That's what it is now, right? You get a PDF from the acoustic engineer who then gives it to the architect to go type it into Revit or Tekla or whatever.
Nice. Okay, so we have 15 minutes? Yeah. Okay, just a couple of things. So we've been talking about this thus far as if this was IFC. Well, that's not the way to look at this. This is very much a way to describe our world and the complexities of it that you should think about it of a structure you can put any data in or reference any data. So this basic pattern of the entity and component has nothing specifically to do with IFC. It's just that it's the right thing to put a new version of IFC in. Yeah, and probably the migration step, not to make a nice pun, is that the first geometry we probably would do is step geometry, right? So you might have P sets, my P set, the same, like a logical first set of components that buildingSMART would author for our data would be property sets. We currently have a property set. That's a good starting point, but it's not the edges of a component. But as an implementation step, you could start making this transition, and that's just step. It's, whether it's our flavor of step geometry or step geometry, we don't have to decide today, but most likely what you'd be doing is just stripping the geometry off and putting it in a separate component. That would be the migration path. How we've not gone through all the details here of how you go forward or how you go like from something like this back. That's a unanswered question. So, but the idea here is like, this can be GIS data. This can be URL to an endpoint that has the control system data in it. Does not matter because this is not an IFC pattern. It's a pattern that applies to all our things, because one of the things we definitely see is that IFC is not the only data source people have to run their businesses if they want to do it on open data. The other piece here that we haven't done much at all is talk about the relationships, because relationships definitely exist. You need those things. Like the most simple one to look at here is like if this is pset step.js, let's say this is the sign. Well, do I want to make 500 instances that duplicate 90% of the data? No, I want to have a sign. I'm going to use the quote quotes type because these words get sticky. But, well, actually, this, and this could be stored on a type and just referenced by a relationship. David.
Next time I'm gonna put a stake in the middle of the room, so you have to.
So they have to stand up. Yeah.
There's a blurring of, or there's a huge similarity between types and information delivery specifications, right? Because you could have, because if a type is a classification and a required amount of data, right? You could have a LOD 100 sign type, LOD 200 sign type, Ministry of Transportation sign type, and all of a sudden that's kind of a specification of what information must be delivered, right? So we can specify that by saying, listen, for this information, for this classification of thing, you need to have these components with these properties and these are limitations on them, and you know, it fits very nicely in this whole system.
So it's better to call this a repeat thing. Type is.
Oh, sorry, a template.
Immediately.
Did you mean template?
I wrote type, crossed it out, and said thing repeat because the word type is already mean 10 things.
I'm talking about something else then. I apologize, everyone.
Yeah. You were, but it's a very valid point. Because the other thing we've pointed out, which David just described, is, and to avoid language problems, I've called this a prototype. And there's archetype. There's a bunch of type words out there that we don't use. We could use archetype as well.
Stereotype.
What's that?
Stereotype. Stereotype?
Yes. So what in some slides you might see for me, what David just described is a collection of components I would call a prototype because it's the ones I need that's specific to this. It's not the thing. It's not a type. It's a, you know, like I said, I'm an owner on my project. I want these. You could have a different one that doesn't have that and adds 2 more, right? So the top level thing, which the only reason I'm not using type is this probably repeats at some level, but it certainly doesn't repeat all the time based on what country you're in and what project types you do. But yeah, so I'm not married to it. It's just I'm just pointing out the complexity of the language things because this concept could be described absolutely and be on a web service that says these are my things. Okay.
There's obviously we could go on and on into these things, and I know Greg and I and a few others have thought too much about this. I'm just wondering if there's reactions from anybody else who's seeing this about the basic idea of moving away from objects with all the properties on an object to a set of components that then get either coordinated or integrated together. The way and we've done, and what people think about that.
Just one quick thing. This is not addressing the plumbing or going through all of IFC and just getting rid of all the concepts that are redundant when you start to put things in here. That's a bunch of work. And simplification, how you make groups and all this stuff is definitely a real bit of this, but this is the architecture. And then there's also the project of, well, we don't need 50 ways to collect things together and assign them a property, that sort of stuff. So
I'm completely out of my depth here, so it's a complete novice look, but what are other domains using? Like, you know, I know I participated on the BIM GIS technical report, and they, you know, GIS has model-driven architecture. Like, they have principles that seem to be missing in the built asset industry. Are there other models or mechanisms out there that exist? I'm thinking of also about PLM. Are there other domains that we could use to inspire, like that maybe have done this and done it in the past that can sort of give a consistent basis that we can start aligning with, you know, aerospace or manufacturing?
I mean, I think you'll find a lot of the pieces. Our industry tends to look a lot different than manufacturing because we don't have a single owner, right? So Yeah, have we seen any component system in other spaces? Maybe other people know this, not me, besides gaming.
So one aspect that I know I've taken from some papers from Airbus around digital mockups is this idea that the structure of how you organize the data is separate from the data, right? So very much this idea of we have a site and a building and a level and then the thing is there. That's not inherent to the door.
Well, yeah, because
right?
you have a
That's a way of looking at it. And so having the relationships and the structure separate from the thing, because the costing, the procurement, the building, the operations, the design, the analysis, they're all going to organize it differently. That's something that's come from the aircraft industry.
Greg, may you add some words? What be the scope of IFC 5 in this paradigm? Because now, for example, despite of previous discussion, IFC 5 was the same like was IFC 4, just modularization. We have data modeling language, and we have IFC 5. What IFC 5 standard, exactly standard, is going to be with this paradigm?
This is this the right architecture? Figure out what IFC 5 looks like in. That's what it, like, we're like, does everything become a classification and we don't have predefined types? I don't know. I mean, we need to re-architect the data and then figure out how to prototype putting the data in it. And we can't do that until we sort of get here. I will say, is Pedro on now, or is that from before? Because like in CATIA, a mechanical modeler, you have a product structure, a part structure, and I'm blanking on the third thing. Can't remember in that world, but they absolutely break the definitions into pieces, just like David said, of separating out these things. So the separation is extremely logical. On the GIS side of things, I don't know. Christoph is the most knowledge person I know has GIS knowledge in the room. Does this sort of separation of data show up in that space?
I was quite agreed with this remark. I mean, what you have to, what's happened today? That means that first of all, the asset is coming from what you show that the asset, what you have to manage, that the asset is coming from the owner. First of all, that is already defined. We can say that 80% of our next activity will be based on the existing. So we are not starting from scratch. That's the first of all. We are starting with existing, and then if we want to have a right decomponents breakdown, we have to have, in your view, you have to have the BIM or CAD breakdown, GIS one, related to environment plus localization, plus Primavera that we are speaking about. PLM. So that means that the same object will be part. It's not a copy. Will be part of different breakdown. And that is important. And GIS and where we are today, if you are come back to S3 today, they are going to use IFC 4.3 as the model inside GIS. So what is important to know to understand about that they are going to use our breakdown coming from IFC to deliver services which is dedicated for another one form of that. And I have a remark of what we are saying, Greg, is I think that we are underestimate the meta model or IFC. The meta model or IFC is based on 3 components. The very operational, high level, what you are calling prototype, but 3 others. One is about spatial decomponent. A spatial decomponents breakdown is not only the layer of the different stair of a building. It's the components in terms of environment issue, local administration, water management, and so on. you have the system, the components, and you have the organic one. I refer to system engineering. And we are most focused on the organic one, how it is built, compare about what are the performance, which is part of the system engineering. And I think that the future for IFC is really to use at the maximum this meta model based on this different approach of breakdown. It's exactly what you have done. You have said 4.3, speaking to, because and one of the weakness we have today is how to integrate in the modeling this special component and the system components. I'm speaking under the control of Andreas.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So the point of thinking about this ECS system and looking at it as the right way to start to look at our industry, and then saying it's not IFC, it's a thing IFC goes in, because we also have to start to have conversations with everybody else that wants to sort of stitch it all together. So we're 2 minutes away from the end. Do we have any really pressing questions from online to wrap up?
Nothing from online, but I guess that it's a nice conclusion of a session if we can just briefly mention next steps. So I won't ask you to do that, but I captured a couple of them. One is more, let's say, research, like look if we can steal from any other technologies in the industry. It's a good one. It's kind of an investigation, can go ahead in parallel.
Right.
And the other one is, we mentioned components, and there needs to be boundaries between these components. So maybe a good exercise could be, let's workshop some of these components. Let's start with a list.
Yeah.
Okay?
So our next steps that came out of the General Assembly meeting was to take what we've proposed and start to put it into a white paper that describes the structure, like not the super detailed version, but the simple to understand, this is what we think is the right way to go. And then Leon's suggestion was start to look at something like the things we have in the alignment problems in IFC 4.3, hard things to do in alignment world in 4.3, and say, how would such a thing apply? And that's where we start to look at different components and define them in such a way that you could start to understand how the system gets applied in a real problem versus arbitrary examples. Any final feedback, questions? Everybody like interactive format more than me just talking at you for an hour and a half? Anybody wanted to just hear me talk at you for an hour and a half?
As long as there is a microphone in the middle of the room, it's fine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you everyone for attending, both online and people in the room. We look forward to seeing you in next sessions of the summit. Enjoy your evening, rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.